The sky was a heavy gray, as if the heavens themselves were mourning. The small cemetery was quiet, save for the soft sobs of a few gathered mourners. Among them stood a little girl, no more than 7 years old, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. Her name was Lily, and today was the day she would say goodbye to her father. Lily's father, David, had been her world. He was the kind of dad who would spin her around in the park until they both collapsed laughing, the kind who would read her bedtime stories with funny voices, and the kind who would always make her feel safe no matter what. But now, he was gone. Taken too soon by an illness that had come like a thief in the night. Lily stood at the edge of the grave, her small hands trembling. She didn't fully understand what death meant, but she knew her father wasn't coming back. The casket lay before her, cold and unyielding. Her mother, Sarah, stood beside her, tears streaming down her face, but Lily couldn't cry. She felt numb, as if her heart had been wrapped in a thick blanket of fog. The priest's voice droned on, but Lily wasn't listening. All she could think about was the last time she had seen her father. He had been lying in a hospital bed, weak and pale, but he had still managed to smile at her. "Remember, Lily," he had whispered. "No matter where I am, I'll always love you. Always." Now, as the casket was lowered into the ground, something inside Lily snapped. She couldn't let him go. Not yet. Before anyone could stop her, she broke free from her mother's grasp and ran to the edge of the grave. The mourners gasped as she leaned over, reaching out as if trying to touch her father one last time. And then, she did something no one expected. She jumped into the grave. The crowd erupted in shock. Sarah screamed and people rushed forward to pull Lily out. But before anyone could reach her, Lily wrapped her tiny arms around the casket and hugged it tightly. Her face pressed against the cold wood, and she whispered, "Daddy, please don't leave me." For a moment everything went still. The wind stopped blowing, the birds stopped chirping, and even the sobs of the mourners seemed to fade away. And then, something extraordinary happened. The casket began to glow. The glow emanating from the casket was soft at first, like the gentle light of a firefly. But it grew brighter, casting a warm golden hue over the grave. The mourners froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. Lily, still hugging the casket, felt a strange warmth seep through the wood and into her arms. It was a warmth she hadn't felt since her father had last held her. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. The glow intensified, and then, as if the universe itself had paused to witness the moment, the casket lid creaked open. Gasps echoed through the cemetery. Sarah clutched her chest, her heart pounding as she stared at the impossible scene unfolding before her. Inside the casket, David's body lay still, but his face was no longer pale and lifeless. Color had returned to his cheeks, and his chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of breath. His eyes fluttered open, and he blinked, as if waking from a deep sleep. "Lily?" he murmured, his voice hoarse but unmistakably alive. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. "Daddy!" she cried, throwing her arms around his neck. David slowly sat up, his movements stiff but deliberate, and wrapped his arms around his daughter. The warmth of his embrace was real, solid, and filled with the love Lily had thought she'd lost forever. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some people screamed, others fell to their knees in prayer, and a few simply stood in stunned silence. Sarah, trembling with a mix of shock and overwhelming relief, stumbled forward and dropped to her knees beside the grave. "David, how is this possible?" she stammered. David looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. "I don't know," he said softly, "but I'm here. I'm really here." The priest, who had been standing frozen at the podium, finally found his voice. This is a miracle," he declared, his tone reverent. "A true miracle." As David carefully climbed out of the grave with Lily still clinging to him, the mourners began to murmur among themselves. Some whispered of divine intervention, while others speculated about scientific explanations. But for Lily, none of that mattered. Her father was back, and that was all she cared about. Sarah reached out and touched David's face as if to confirm he was real. "I thought I'd lost you," she said, her voice breaking. David took her hand and pressed it to his chest, where his heart beat strong and steady. "You didn't," he said. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The family embraced, their tears mingling as they held each other tightly. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered in their hearts, a hope that had been extinguished but now burned brighter than ever. The news of David's miraculous return spread like wildfire. By the next morning, the small town was abuzz with whispers, theories, and awe. Reporters camped outside the family's modest home, hoping for a glimpse of the man who had come back from the dead. Neighbors brought casseroles and flowers, their faces a mix of curiosity and reverence. But inside the house, the atmosphere was quiet and intimate, as the family tried to process what had happened. David sat on the couch, his hands resting on his knees. He looked healthier than he had in months, but there was a faraway look in his eyes, as if he were still trying to piece together the puzzle of his return. Lily sat beside him, her small hand clutching his, as if afraid he might disappear again. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen making tea, though her hands shook so badly she nearly spilled the boiling water. "Do you remember anything?" Sarah asked, setting a cup of tea in front of David. "Anything at all?" David frowned, his brow furrowing in concentration. "It's hazy," he admitted. "I remember being in the hospital. I remember feeling weak, and then nothing. Just darkness. And then I heard Lily's voice. She was calling me, begging me not to leave her, and I couldn't let her go. I had to come back." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide. "I knew you'd come back, Daddy," she said softly. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." David smiled and ruffled her hair. "I'll never leave you, sweetheart. Not if I can help it." But as the days passed, it became clear that David's return had changed more than just their family. Strangers began showing up at their door, asking for blessings or advice. Some claimed he was a messenger from God, while others believed he held the secret to eternal life. The attention was overwhelming, and Sarah grew increasingly protective of her husband and daughter. "We can't keep living like this," she said one evening after shooing away yet another group of curious onlookers. "People are treating you like you're not even human anymore." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know," he said. "But what can we do? They're not going to stop, not unless we give them answers." "But we don't have answers," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "We don't even know how this happened." David looked at her, his expression serious. "Maybe we don't need to know," he said. "Maybe this wasn't about answers. Maybe it was about second chances." Sarah fell silent, considering his words. She glanced at Lily, who was curled up in an armchair, fast asleep. Her heart ached with love and gratitude, but also with fear. What did this miracle mean for their future? And what would happen if the world's fascination with David turned into something darker? The family's quiet life was no longer their own. Within a week, David's story had gone global. News outlets from every corner of the world clamored for interviews, and social media exploded with hashtags like #MiracleMan and #Back from the Dead. Scientists, religious leaders, and skeptics alike debated the phenomenon, each offering their own theories. Some called it divine intervention, while others speculated about undiscovered medical miracles or even elaborate hoaxes. David, Sarah, and Lily found themselves thrust into the spotlight, their every move scrutinized. They were offered book deals, movie rights, and even a reality show. But David refused them all. "This isn't a story to sell," he told Sarah one night. "This is our life, and I won't let them turn it into a circus." Despite his efforts, the pressure mounted. One morning, as David stepped outside to get the mail, he was ambushed by a crowd of reporters. Microphones were thrust in his face, and cameras flashed like lightning. "Mr. Carter, can you explain what happened to you?" one reporter shouted. "Do you think you were brought back by a higher power?" another demanded. David held up his hands, trying to shield his face. Please," he said, his voice firm but weary. "I don't have any answers. I just want to be with my family." But the crowd didn't relent. They followed him to the doorstep, their questions growing more intrusive. "How does it feel to be a miracle?" someone called out. Do you think you're immortal now? Sarah appeared at the door, her face flushed with anger. That's enough, she snapped. Leave us alone. She grabbed David's arm and pulled him inside, slamming the door shut behind them. Lily, who had been watching from the window, looked up at her parents with wide, frightened eyes. Why are they so mean? She asked. Why can't they just leave us alone? David knelt down and took her hands in his. Because sometimes people don't understand things that are different, he said gently. And when they don't understand, they get scared. But we'll get through this, okay? Together. Despite his reassuring words, David couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. He didn't feel like a miracle. He felt like a man who had been given a second chance, a chance to be there for his family, to make up for lost time. But the world's obsession with his return was threatening to take that chance away. One evening, as the family sat down to dinner, there was a knock at the door. Sarah groaned. Not again, she muttered, getting up to answer it. But when she opened the door, she found not a reporter or a curious stranger, but a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Hi, the woman said. My name is Dr. Emily Carter. I'm a researcher specializing in unexplained phenomena. I know you've been through a lot and I don't want to intrude, but if you're willing, I'd like to help you understand what happened. Sarah hesitated, glancing back at David. He nodded slowly. Let her in, he said. Maybe it's time we stopped running from the questions. Dr. Emily Carter stepped into the house, her presence calm and unassuming. She carried a small notebook and a tablet, but there was no sense of urgency or intrusion in her demeanor. She introduced herself properly, shaking hands with David and Sarah, and even crouching down to Lily's level to greet her with a warm smile. I know this must be overwhelming for you, Emily said as she sat down at the kitchen table. And I want to assure you, I'm not here to exploit your story. I'm here to help if you'll let me. David studied her for a moment, then nodded. We've been avoiding this for too long, he admitted. Maybe it's time we tried to understand what happened. Over the next few hours, Emily asked gentle but probing questions. She wanted to know everything, David's medical history, the events leading up to his death, and the moments after his return. She listened intently, jotting down notes and occasionally asking for clarification. Lily, who had been quietly coloring at the table, looked up at one point and asked, Are you going to take Daddy away again? Emily's expression softened. No, sweetheart, she said. I'm here to make sure your daddy stays right here with you. As the conversation continued, Emily shared her own theories. What happened to you, David, defies conventional science, she said. But there are documented cases of unexplained recoveries, often linked to extreme emotional triggers. Some researchers believe that love, especially the bond between a parent and child, can create a kind of energy that transcends our understanding of life and death. Sarah frowned. Are you saying Lily's love brought him back? Emily hesitated. I'm saying that love might have played a role, but I can't say for sure. What I do know is that your family has been given an extraordinary gift, and my goal is to help you protect it. David leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Protect it how? He asked. Emily sighed. The world is fascinated by your story, and that fascination can be dangerous. There are people who will want to study you, to test you, even to exploit you. My team and I can help shield you from that. We can provide resources, security, and even a platform to share your story on your own terms. Sarah exchanged a glance with David. What do you think? She asked. David took a deep breath. I think we need to take control of this before it takes control of us. Over the next few days, Emily worked closely with the family to develop a plan. They decided to hold a press conference, not to answer every question, but to set boundaries. David would share his story, but only as much as he was comfortable with. He would emphasize that he was not a miracle worker or a prophet, just a man who had been given a second chance to be with his family. The day of the press conference arrived, and the family stood together on a small stage, facing a sea of cameras and reporters. David stepped up to the microphone, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I don't have all the answers, he began, and I don't know why I was given this second chance. But what I do know is that love, the love of my family, is what brought me back, and that's the only miracle I care about." The room fell silent, and for the first time the frenzy around David's story seemed to soften. People began to see him not as a phenomenon to be dissected, but as a man who had been reunited with his family against all odds. After the press conference, the family's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The media attention didn't disappear entirely, but it became more manageable. Emily's team helped filter requests and provided security to ensure the family's privacy. Slowly but surely, David, Sarah, and Lily started to reclaim their lives. David returned to work at the local auto repair shop, where his co-workers greeted him with a mix of awe and relief. "We thought we'd lost you, man," his best friend and co-worker Mike said, clapping him on the back. "But you're tougher than you look." Sarah went back to teaching at the elementary school, though she found herself fielding curious questions from her students. "Is it true your husband came back from the dead?" one child asked innocently. Sarah smiled and replied, "It's true that love can do amazing things." Lily, meanwhile, became something of a local celebrity at her school. Her classmates were fascinated by her story, and she often found herself surrounded by curious kids during recess. But she didn't mind. She was just happy to have her daddy back. At home, the family cherished their time together. They went on picnics, played board games, and spent evenings watching movies curled up on the couch. David made a point of being present, really present, in every moment. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah turned to David and said, "Do you ever think about what happened? I mean, really think about it?" David nodded. "All the time," he admitted. "I don't understand it, but I'm grateful for it, and I think it's changed me." "How so?" Sarah asked. David hesitated, searching for the right words. "I feel like I see things differently now," he said. "Like I notice the little things more, the way Lily laughs when she's playing, the way you hum when you're cooking. It's like I've been given a chance to really live, not just exist." Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I think we've all been given that chance," she said. "We've been reminded of what's important. But even as they embraced their new normal, there were moments of uncertainty. David sometimes woke in the middle of the night, his heart racing, as if afraid he might lose everything again. And Sarah couldn't shake the nagging fear that the miracle might come with a price. One day, Emily returned for a follow-up visit. She brought with her a stack of research papers and a thoughtful expression. "I've been looking into cases similar to yours," she said. "And while there's no clear explanation, there's a common thread: love. In every case, the person who returned was deeply connected to someone who refused to let them go." David frowned. "What does that mean for us?" Emily smiled gently. "It means that your story is a testament to the power of love. But it also means that you have a responsibility, to each other and to the world. Your story has inspired millions of people. It's given them hope, and that's something you can't take lightly." David nodded, his expression serious. "We'll do our best," he said. "But we're just a family trying to live our lives." "And that's enough," Emily replied. "Sometimes the most powerful stories are the simplest ones." Years passed, and the world's fascination with David's story began to fade. The family settled into a peaceful life, their days filled with the ordinary joys and challenges of raising a child, building a career, and nurturing a marriage. But the miracle that had brought them back together remained a quiet undercurrent in their lives, a reminder of the power of love and the fragility of life. Lily grew into a bright, compassionate teenager, her father's resilience and her mother's kindness shining through in everything she did. She often asked David about the day he returned, not out of curiosity, but out of a deep sense of gratitude. "I think about it all the time," she told him one evening. "How lucky I am to have you here." David smiled, his heart swelling with love. "I'm the lucky one," he said. "I get to watch you grow up, to be here for all the big moments. That's the real miracle." Sarah, too, found herself reflecting on their journey. She wrote a book about their experience, not to capitalize on their story, but to share the message of hope and love that had defined their lives. The book became a bestseller, touching the hearts of readers around the world. Letters poured in from people who had been inspired by their story. Parents who had lost children, spouses who had lost partners, and countless others who had faced unimaginable loss. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a young mother who had lost her husband in a tragic accident. She wrote, "Your story gave me hope when I thought there was none. It reminded me that love doesn't end, even when life does. Thank you for showing me that miracles are possible." Sarah read the letter aloud to David and Lily, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is why we went through all of it," she said, "to remind people that love is stronger than anything." David nodded, his eyes glistening. "We didn't ask for this," he said. "But if our story can help even one person, then it was worth it." As the years went on, the family continued to live their lives with purpose and gratitude. They volunteered at local charities, spoke at events about the importance of cherishing every moment, and always made time for each other. Their home was filled with laughter, love, and the kind of quiet joy that comes from knowing how precious life truly is. One crisp autumn evening, as the family sat around the fireplace, Lily turned to her parents and said, "Do you think we'll ever understand what happened? Why you came back, Dad?" David shook his head. "I don't think we're meant to understand," he said. "Some things are bigger than us, but I do know this. Love brought me back, and love is what keeps us together." Sarah reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "And that's enough," she said softly. Lily smiled, her heart full. "It's more than enough." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. Outside, the stars twinkled in the night sky, a reminder of the vast, mysterious universe. But in that moment, the family was content to focus on the small, beautiful world they had built together, a world defined not by miracles, but by the enduring power of love.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.